It's been very conversational. So, we have some things, but it may lead itself to somewhere else. Towards the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So yeah, we'll keep it pretty short. Short introduction of who I am. So I'll be moderating. My name is Dr. Terron Beurden. I'm the Manager of Community Learning and Experience at the Urban Art Space, where I work with communities both inside the university and outside of the university, and try to reconceptualize what community is, how we think about our space, education, art as a tool for education, a tool for change, a tool for empowerment, and how we can maximize art impact as an extension of the university to carry those resources and responsibilities into the community. So with that being said, I would like to ask the panel to introduce themselves. And if you notice, behind us there are some images. So I'm going to call on the panelists to be introduced, and if you would give a short bio, and then we'll show some of the work that corresponds to your process and who you are. So I can start with Dr. Sarah and Beurden at the end.
Take the mute off.
Yeah. Can you all hear me this way? Do I need a? No, okay, I'm good. Hi, my name is Sarah Van Beurden. I am a professor at Ohio State University. I teach in the Department of History and the Department of African American and African Studies. And I'm the curator of the exhibition that you see on the walls around you here. I work primarily in Central Africa, in the Congo. I am a historian by training, but I do projects that are sort of at the intersection of art history, cultural studies, and history, cultural anthropology, a little bit of everything, really. And so that's that's where this exhibition came from as well. And in the context of making this exhibition and talking to Dr. Banner, it seemed like it might be a good idea to have a conversation about art and activism, specifically as that question sort of emerges locally as well here in Columbus. Lucie very much embodies that connection in what she does. She very explicitly claims the identity of an artist and an activist and an educator and a historian. So I felt like that, she wrote the agenda for us in that sense for our conversation today. So that's where the idea of the panel came from. Thank you.
Next, we'll pass the mic to Professor Newsum.
Oh, hi. Oh, there.
All right, some of you already know me. I'm Ike Newsum, former chair of African American African Studies, former director of the African American Studies Community Extension Center, so I've done both. I'm also an artist. When I was on the faculty at OSU, I taught courses on African American art, film, African American film history, and some courses in literature. I guess that's it.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Amina Kassim.
Okay, I can speak without mine. So my name is Amina Kassim. I am Ghanaian, born and raised. I'm a figurative artist. I moved to the U.S. in 2017 to pursue graduate school at Ohio University, and I had been living there up until last year when I graduated. So I have a background in linguistics, which has been my main area for a very long time. But after I moved to the U.S., I decided to pursue an MFA because I had always wanted to do art, and my dad thought art was for drug addicts. I'm sorry. My dad, yeah, that's a long story, but yeah, he was like, all his friends that did art ended up as drug addicts, so no, I'm not going to do art. Yeah, but it's a different story now. Obviously, he supports what I do now, so yeah, pretty much. I think that's and I've been practicing art professionally since I graduated last year. So I'm looking to engage more within the art community. But yeah, thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Marshall Shorts.
What's up, y'all? My name is Marshall Shorts. I am an artist, entrepreneur, co-founded a couple things, Creative Control Fest, which was a conference we did that centered Black creatives and creatives of color, and then also a founding member of Maroon Arts Group, which is a local arts nonprofit that centers Black cultural production on the Near East Side, but beyond. And Cleveland native, but been in Columbus about 20 years now, which is wild to say. Yeah, I mean, these days my art kind of centers around like bringing people together around culture and art, and really trying to find my way back to a more consistent artistic practice. I'm a design practitioner by day, so I run a cultural branding and design company called Artfluential as well, so that's how I make a living. But yeah, honored to be here, and a lot of my stuff is kind of steeped in community, and yeah.
Great. So these questions will be open to any of you. Feel free to chime in. As I say, a great segue, thinking about community, culture, and art. And in the context of an exhibition like this, the question that I'm wondering for you all is how does culture, cultural background, heritage inform your practice and your artwork?
Well, I always like to say that I'm an African-American artist that makes African art. And I say that without thinking about appropriation or anything like that. I see African art and culture as a part of my heritage. So the art that I create is often based upon African art. But I also do work that's, kind of profoundly political. I don't know if anything's gonna come up. Well, maybe I should talk about something. But I think that it would be difficult for me, I don't know about other people, but for me to produce art that wasn't rooted in my heritage, my culture. That's the only way I can do it. I can tell you that in the 1950s, some African-American artists were trying to kind of appeal to the European art world, and I know in '53 there was a big exhibit in France, and one of the African American artists were invited to submit works. They wanted to kind of feature African American artists, but at this time the artists were doing stuff that was the jurors thought was imitation. It was imitation, So I think I learned a lesson from that. As opposed to trying to appease the master, I thought, well, let me just go ahead and do some, Afrocentric art because that's who I am. But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so for me, so I talked a little bit about how I moved from Ghana here for grad school, and essentially that's been the center of my work ever since. In the past I have done like works that talked about like identity. There are no images about that here, but works that talked about like identity, because when I moved here, I realized I was more than just Amina. I realized, oh, Amina is a Black girl. Amina is a Muslim girl. Amina is an African. So all those identities are like, I started coming coming to understand them in the context of this society, because I feel it's important. It is the way I would say Americans understand people. So I realized that all these aspects of my identity that were not perhaps necessary to define when I was in Ghana all became super necessary. So a lot of my earlier works when I was in grad school were about that. But also in my works, I'm talking about issues of migration, immigration, because I am an immigrant, even though I came here for school. I'm talking about displacement. I'm talking about cultural transfer. I'm talking about all of these things because that is the space that I find myself in. I'm talking about community, especially immigrant communities, how they contribute to creating a sense of belonging for their members. So these are all like some of the things that I currently am actively doing in my work, and it just portraying very mundane, sometimes mundane, very little things we do for each other, as a way to support each other, just to create that sense of home or familiar space for ourselves. And that's like what I'm exploring currently. And as we go on like this conversation, I will probably get the chance to talk a little bit more about that and how it probably relates to like this conversation. Yeah.
Those are great points. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like your artwork incorporates lived experience, right? Much like Lucie's does. And so do you think that, well, oftentimes lived experience shown through art, either intentionally or unintentionally, can be considered activism, right? Do you think that is something that is present in your work? And then part two of that, is that fair to the artist? Or does that become taxing, right? To take on that responsibility or to take on that charge, even if you're only talking about your own lived experience?
Okay.
I think there is a responsibility of the art in general. I think culture informs everything that we do, our art included. I think regardless of whether we want the art to have a responsibility or not, there is a responsibility that art kind of takes on inherently, particularly when it's shared. I think the artist's intention has everything to do with the artist's responsibility and what they choose to sort of take on. But the artist can't also evade the responsibility of what their art is doing in the world, to me, you know what I mean? And I think when you try to separate that, the opposite can happen, right? Like the burden you're trying to avoid can become also the burden of your avoidance of the responsibility can become the burden that your art is sort of taking on. So why not just envelop the responsibility, particularly for oppressed people? I think me and my son were talking about W.E.B. Du Bois because he got a homework assignment that he has to present on Booker T and W.E.B. Du Bois. But Du Bois has a quote. I'm not going to quote it correctly, but he talks about all art as being propaganda, and how he doesn't give a damn, in his words, of any art that does not intentionally, I guess, push a narrative forward. I think I was very struck and convicted by the work of Lucie. I almost felt like I'm not doing enough with my art when I was like just kind of looking at what she's done with the work that she's doing. Talking about political economy, talking about corruption, talking about colonialism, in a very common way, right? Like, so, we were doing a tour with Dr. Sarah earlier, who was kind of talking about this work so beautifully, but it was a commonness about it. And when I watched the video, she talked about leaving this work so that future generations can know what happened, right? Like, can know about, colonizing, and can know about the independence, can know about what happened to Patrice Lumumba. And that's what makes it great, but it's also simple in a way for the common person to understand. And it wasn't necessarily meant for the gallery or academic walls or, and things like that, that it was meant for the generation that was coming after to be able to kind of understand the history sort of taking on and are responsible for carrying on. So for me, anything I do, I'm a designer, design is very intentional. It has impact. There's a saying, anything not designed by nature is designed by someone, right? Which means like everything is designed, and so the decisions and choices we choose and make, art kind of sits back and tries to ask the questions. But I think there's a grave responsibility of the artist and the artwork to do something. Now, what that responsibility is, I think is up to the artist to decide, but I don't know that the artist has full control over that.
It seems like in her case, there is actually her claim to the identity of artist is an activist stance in and of itself, because it is not an identity that is easily accorded to older women, and especially not older women in her society. So there is even sort of this desire to effect change through her claim of being an artist and through her claim on that identity, and going against sort of the grander art historical narratives about who does fine art and what is art. And she, I think, is sort of extraordinary in her sort of boldness in claiming that identity and going against, and that very move in itself is an activist move, I think, in sort of in the setting that she's in. Yeah.
So it's interesting because I remember when I started documenting these experiences that I'm talking about, I used to consciously tell myself, oh, I don't want my work to be political. I just want to, this is a beautiful community of people. I want to show people that are not part of the community what it's like within, just give an insider's perspective about on what you normally would not see. So it was a conscious effort, but I realized very early on that the subjects that I was very much interested in, the subject that formed the basis of my narrative in general, was in itself political, because I'm talking about immigration. It's political, and I realized my attempt to kind of it was a psychological thing. Psychologically depoliticize it was inevitably gonna fail, because I realized at some point in my work I started shifting towards a certain I think it just happened naturally, in the sense that I started exploring certain ideas as they come and based on experiences that I had lived. Can we do the other one, the background with the flag background here? The guy with the backpack. Yes. So I did this was the first piece that made me realize that, okay, this is a subject that I cannot avoid, even if I try not to talk about it explicitly. People are going to see your work and read meanings into it, and that's something you can control. So this piece I did as a reference to COVID, and I got this idea in 2019. And basically, it was when Trump when COVID hit and Trump was like, oh, international students should go back home since classes are online now, it caused a huge frenzy within the international student community, because for a lot of them, this is a huge step towards building the life that they've always wanted. It's not necessarily about coming to America in its sense. For some, it is, but you're in grad school. Grad school is expensive back home, so you're getting to do grad school for free. You're getting all these resources, all these support. So suddenly, a decision can just take that away from you, all of a sudden, and it just got me thinking what's the word? I don't know the word, but something could just change the course of your life so easily, And these are things we struggle with, as either as an international student or as immigrants in general. These are things that come every now and then. These are struggles that we have to deal with every day. So I would have the COVID as a reference to the time within which it happened. And this, the pattern behind him is I don't know if you know the Ghana Must Go bag. So Ghana Must Go bag, maybe a little bit, they're huge tote bags. They have, I think there's an image with the, no, sorry, it's okay, I'm gonna keep going. Yes. Yeah. So these are Ghana Must Go bags. There's a little bit of history to them. These bags are as old as I know. So in the 1980s, when about 2 million Ghanaians were expelled from Nigeria, they were undocumented. And when they were leaving the country, these are the bags they kind of packed their belongings, everything they had worked for, all the properties they have garnered. This is what they packed in. So they became notorious and got the nickname Ghana Must Go until date. But now it's used as a symbol of immigration, and then also as a symbol of fashion, because Louis Vuitton did a luxury rendition of these bags that were going for crazy prices, and you would find celebrities take pictures with them, but a little bit history. So for me, taking it as a symbol of immigration, I wanted to incorporate that in the work, just to directly show that this is your status until, and even after, it's not about being documented or not being documented. It is a state, and you always be an immigrant, and it's fine. I don't personally. For me, it's not political. It's fine. It's how you see it. So yeah, that was a little bit. So I essentially coming back to this idea of activism. For me, it's just the effort to bring to light or make visible what these experiences are within such communities, their struggles, their successes. For me, that is a form of activism. Even though I find now that my work's shifting towards a more direct activist approach, but it's not intended at all. It just happened. Yeah.
I'm obviously of a different generation, older generation. And I grew up as an artist in the midst of the civil rights, Black Power movement. And personally, I didn't feel I had a real, and I'm not saying this in a negative sense, a real choice in terms of what my subject matter would be. It was the movement. It was what was going on in the 60s and the 70s. And I recognized that my art would not always be pleasant. You know, right now they're talking about eliminating certain things in schools because it makes some people uncomfortable. Well, I kind of knew that my work was going to make people uncomfortable, and I also thought that it had to make people uncomfortable. So that was never the kind of, wondering about, if I wanted my art to be something that might please everybody. I knew it wasn't going to please everybody. Go back to the other image, the image with the flag. As I'm losing my memory, I'm also hearing people say things like, say her name, remember them, talking about black people, people of color who have been killed by the police or by vigilantes, whatever. So I decided I needed to do a flag. And in that flag, I had to acknowledge these people who have been murdered, who have been killed. So this clearly is quite intentional, What you see here, what you can't see, is at the bottom, there are 13 stripes, 7 red, 6 white, and then I added a 14th black stripe that has a row of tombstones. One of them says Quest. Quest is Ahmaud Arbery. That was his nickname, Quest. But I've done some work that might seem a little more unpleasant, right? Do the hanging board. Next. Okay. You can't reduce it down, can you? Well, what you have here, this was an installation I did at the Cincinnati Art Academy. It is about, it's a carving of a boy. He's about 4.5 feet tall. Strange fruit, SOS, an American crime scene. It's about a lynching. And I feel that while it may be unpleasant, I have to do this kind of work. I have to, shock people into recognizing the historical circumstances of people of color, of black people in this country. So I guess I've said enough, maybe. But I think that's one of the very strong examples of what art can do. Probably some people wouldn't even consider that art, but I do. I consider it art. It's a very necessary art.
So I think that's a great question. Like, what can art do? And through all of your answers, I heard so many things and so many ideas came to mind. The boys, right? And then the Black Power movement. So I started thinking, with Du Bois, his early philosophy to how he kind of ended, it's a little bit different, right? But one of the things early on Du Bois tried to incorporate our approach through art was this idea of like art slavery, right? Where it wasn't necessarily trying to have pro-black art, but to incorporate and create art that would appeal to a sense of Americanness or humanity, right? And then of course that changed towards the end of the latter part of his life. And then towards the Black Power movement and particularly the Black Arts movement, it was like, no, we're going to have pro-black art because we're going to create this black aesthetic. And it's for us, right? It's for us. And then even to your point, like art reflects life, right? And when I say that, there's kind of two components to it. I think art is very much a social science. Or Sarah mentioned about Lucie's work, where she is wrestling with who is a fine art. So what is fine art, right? And that is a form of propaganda because it's offering an agenda. And agendas oftentimes make the invisible visible or try to attack a master narrative. So long story short, my question is, when you hear master narrative, right, what does that mean to you? And do you feel like you address that in your work, your process, your research, or teaching?
Master narrative.
So master narrative being like an idea, like the American dream, so to speak.
Yeah, so master narrative like that, or as in
Like as an individual artist, do we have that or portray that in our work?
yeah, like what do you think does that mean to you? Is that addressed in your work, or how does that impact you? This narrative that is perhaps sustained, perpetuated, naturalized, so much that it's commonsensical, right? But it may not reflect the diverse living spirits of all.
I mean, I certainly recognize that as an academic and as a historian, that's something that is innate to how I understand my job, in particular as a Belgian doing the history of Central Africa, as somebody who's from the place that was the colonizer. That there is still, and I very much grew up in a setting in Belgium where these older master narratives about good Belgian colonialism were still very powerful, and that the Belgians, did good and brought civilization to Central Africa. And I know that it's often not done to claim that your academic practice has that almost like activist tinge to it, but it is the case because it is a practice that came from a place that an academic practice that came from a place that said, well, there's that narrative needs to be undermined and needs to be pushed against. And one of the ways to do that is to do this kind of historical academic work that shows this other vision. And that's also where sort of my thinking, when I first saw her work, because that really connected to my thinking, because that's exactly what she does, right, in how she portrays the colonial past and how she portrays sort of the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, who was the first democratically elected prime minister of the DRC, is that she shows the other face of that history. She sort of pushes back against the way in which that history for generations has been told in history books. And I think that's something that you can do through academic practice as well, and as well as artistic practice. But I do think, that it's, I don't know if you agree with me, that it's still often sort of frowned upon, which is one of the reasons that, and this takes us way too far off the road, but that Black Studies is often attacked. It's like you cannot have a political agenda, or you cannot have an activist agenda, but everybody does. There's no such thing as neutrality in the production of knowledge or in the production of art. Yeah. It's just about who gets the claim to have that neutrality.
Talk about the Ashcan artists of I think it was the 30s or 40s. But when artists make decisions to use certain media, to become magpies and just go around collecting things that become art, that is a kind of a counter narrative to a master narrative that embraces canvas and oil painted marble and all that kind of stuff. So artists kind of challenge the master narrative in so many ways, the materials they choose, the subject matter they care about.
I'll just add, I think Black artists has always challenged the sort of master narrative of the art world, like in the sense that, to your point, like, you know, fine art has to be on canvas, oil, all of these things, you know, graffiti, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think part of Lucie's work is a lot of it is, you know, found material. It's you know, it's what's available. I think in the video she even talks about if she had access to a way to write books, she would write books. You know what I mean? So I think there's always sort of been this sort of counter cultural narrative that I'm going to keep saying oppressed people, but like have had to sort of question what is deemed. To me, the master narrative of the art world is that the art world exists and that art is ornamental and that it doesn't have intrinsic value outside of, you know, entertainment or you know, like, and it doesn't, until it gets to a certain level, right? And then it can mean something else, right? It can mean more than what it is. So when I'm talking to like students, I'm like, it's never more valuable than when it's with you and when you're creating it and when you are, you know, when and for that community that you sort of come from, right? And I think, you know, there are ways in which art has perpetuated whatever that master narrative is, or artists have perpetuated that, but also sort of countering it, or the intention is to counter, but the art world is like, actually, we like that. Like we gonna take that. Right? You talked about the bags, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're gonna appreciate you, man. We're gonna co-opt it. You know what I'm saying? So it's a constant struggle to combat, you know, sort of so-called master narrative of what it means to be an artist, you know, and what we understand art in the world in like this commercial sense, like we gotta sell our art, we gotta make a living as artists, and I just didn't see that in this body of work. It was like, this is a call. This is my duty to tell this story. This is my duty to history. That you know, you talked about it intentionally sort of being in French so that it would be accessible because she only speaks Swahili, right? And so that just made me think about like, why isn't Swahili acceptable in the context of understanding it in the world? Why can't the world be forced to learn Swahili as opposed to French or, you know, things like that? So you know, it's a lot there. I'll stop.
Yeah, so, go ahead.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what you said, I think it's interesting. For me, the thing that I find most fascinating about Lucie's work, it's just her medium in the sense of it, because embroidery is primarily known as a woman's occupation, exactly. So the fact that she's able to use that to like take back that agency and then still push back on these like very important social like issues, and I think it's amazing how she's able to do that.
Yeah, this is not what the nuns had in mind when they told embroidery. Yes.
Like, she was forced to learn this, right? Like, it was
just part of Catholic missionary schooling
Yeah.
at the time, and it was something taught to girls because there was a belief that it would make you industrious. It's going to make you, teach you discipline. It's going to do all of those things to be able to, to do the embroidery. And then she sort of has a career as a midwife. She gets an education and does something completely different. And then later in life, when she has experienced personal trauma in the first Congo War, this is what she reaches to be able to process it and to be able to sort of work through it and give it voice and give it a broader voice. And it's interesting that it's such a subversion of the genre initially. Yeah.
Great points. I'm thinking about medium now, right? And the power of mediums, and counter narratives and repurposing when it comes to particularly Black creativity, right? And mediums. So I have a question for the audience.
Let me say something.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You know, the neo-ancestralist artists in Cincinnati celebrated the creative expression of common folks, things they saw in neighborhoods, in people's yards, how one man who was a painter, house painter, would paint his trucks. You know, Basquiat, like, you know. That embrace of the creative expression of common folk is an act of resistance. It is activism. You know, it is about community uplift. You know, to make people in the community feel that they are valued and their creative expression is valued. So artists who go to school to be artists or whatever, you know, it is good when artists who have been trained in fine art, or artists who come from a background of privilege or whatever, right, make that decision that they're going to embrace something that is not, you know, expected, you know, in terms of the art world. But, you know, talk about how the art world can absorb and co-opt things. The neo-ancestralists, it became a very popular art movement in Cincinnati. And the art establishment embraced them. And you wonder, what does that mean? What does that do to the art? But the art world is a tricky world.
Yeah. You asked what art can do. So I think it can do a lot, but we should be sort of very honest about what it's not doing as well. I'm a part of a group that's doing a study about public art in the city, which raises for me all kinds of questions. Now, the city and the county are asking different questions, right? That is probably geared more towards marketing and tourism of the city. But it does, for me, raise a question about what is public, for instance, right? And what is the role of public art and public discourse and those types of things. And while art can ask the questions and can kind of point out, right, I think it can do these things really well, it does not remove the labor that must happen for things to actually change. So, you know, art can very much call out, you know, poverty and things like that, but policy has to change, like, you know, it can talk about the conflict, and oftentimes it is where it starts, right? Art is kind of where those conversations start. Art is kind of like the impetus for, well, the thing is the impetus, right? But art is often the vehicle for like the communication of what's happening. But one of the things I was thinking about as we've been doing that public art piece, and then this even raises, is like, what can art do? Also makes me think about what art can't do and the responsibility of art, but the responsibility of us as human beings, of people, to make certain decisions, to change, to make change, to actually act, right? And I think the artist plays a very pivotal role in taking action. One of the things that for me was like, you need space for art, right? So you had the picture of the box park. I'm sorry. Oh, no, you don't have to. Yes, so we need space, you know what I mean? Like, we need physical space. You know, for a long time, we didn't have Black artists in the short north, except Amina and, you know, occasionally Kojo and some of these artists, or unless you reach a certain level, we probably won't even welcome in the galleries, you know, there. So I think, you know, for me, as an artist who lacked space, it was important to start to create space. But and so I can use my the skills I developed at training as an artist to apply it to creating space, you know what I mean? And thinking about what space looks like, both physical space, but also space to create. And so when we were doing the work of Maroon Arts Group, right, which required me not painting a picture, right, or not taking a picture or something like that, right? So I think, you know, just raising the questions around, like, you know, what art, what the role of art is, and what it can actually do, versus like what is on us to do as individuals, as artists. You know, a lot of artists will say, well, yeah, I made the art, you know, that's all I got to do. You know what I mean? But artists can also be organizers. They can also be, you know, run for office, right? Like there are other things I think that kind of go inside. But when you separate art from culture, right, and kind of put it over here, then you minimize or relegate it to something that is not as powerful as it actually is.
Just to piggyback on what you're saying, I wanted to talk about Houston's Project Row House. Project Row House in Houston, Texas, in the 3rd Ward. 7 artists came together and decided they needed to do something that, you know, would uplift the community. And there were a lot of abandoned row houses. Row houses are they call shotgun houses. You can stand in the front door and look out the back door. They're very narrow. You see them here. So 7 artists decided that they should acquire some of these row houses. And some of them are used as like galleries, you know. Artists are invited from all over the world to come to Houston. They're given a house. They're told, and they're given $2,500 something. Say, hey, do something with it. They can do something to the outside or the inside, you know. But that's one part of what they do. There's another set of houses in the same strip here, further down, that are dedicated to helping women who have been targets of domestic violence, who experience poverty, and they have as many houses for those women as they do for artists to have expression. And those women receive, you know, training to prepare them for the work world. These are artists who thought beyond just what I can paint, what I can sculpt, but what else can I do that advances the interests of communities.
Before I get to the power of mediums, I think some of these talking points I want to reconsider. And I want to make sure, I think it's important for the audience too, that we really conceptualize this master narrative before moving on. And so this is a question for everyone, or I may see an answer. When you hear fine artists, or master artists, I should say, right? Who comes to mind? If I say master artists, who comes to mind? What are some names? Da Vinci, yep. Picasso, for sure.
David Driscoll. Go on.
Yeah.
Just to be funny.
Yeah, but that's right. The idea is that right away, hearing this, because language is involved in this as well. Right away, we have mental images of probably old white men, right? And that's master artists, right? Who defines that? Is that our narrative? Or is that one that has been perpetuated and normalized so much so that automatically that's what we envision when we hear the word, right? In the same way you may hear fine art, right? So you can be classical oil paintings perhaps. But like you mentioned, why not graffiti? We go back to the box part. So like even graffiti and kind of moving that as why not a idea of fine art, right? And Basquiat, I think you mentioned Professor Basquiat,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Fine artists, master artists, why not, right? But he used graffiti. And he was against this commercialization. He was against this idea of a master artist. But what happened, right? Often got co-opted like this art did,
Yes, yes.
right? So that's just a better understanding perhaps of how this master narrative can be addressed and countered, but still it runs the risk of co-optation,
Yes.
right? And I mean, we use graffiti at the box art for June 20 Ave. My little TV is right there, so I'm trying my hand at graffiti. I wasn't that good at it, right? But having spaces like this, right, having opportunities to explore art outside of the traditional fine art or the ways the master artists were doing is important.
Which the police were called as this installation was happening and people saw in our gentrifying community graffiti going up in broad daylight, decided to call the city and complain that somebody was doing graffiti at the site. So again, you know, different context. If it was in here and they were doing graffiti, would the response be the same, right?
You know, what you remind me of is that when I was talking about the new ancestralists in Cincinnati, and the art establishment embraced them. But they didn't embrace the people that they were trying to celebrate. Like Mr. Batchelor, who's a guy in the community. He owns 2 lots, and both lots are filled with creative pieces, you know, installations. And the art establishment didn't invite him into the gallery. So, that contradiction, yeah.
There's
So-
also something, because I was struck by the fact that the second name that was called, the name was Picasso, because you gotta peel back the layers of the master narrative as well, right? Because one of the things that enables Picasso to do what he does is because he starts looking at historical
African art, yeah.
Because that is what breaks, that is
Yeah.
what.
That was his big break.
Good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Yeah, but so
That's
there's
what
sort
he
of,
did.
there's this behind the master narrative, there's questions of who gets to speak and who gets attention and who is considered legitimate or authentic and who is not. And those, I think the answers to those questions do shift under the influence of artistic practices, but they are always pushing up against boundaries that they need to jump over, right?
But thinking about mediums, right, kind of brings back, and we see a medium here, right? And how, again, we talk about repurposing is oftentimes a form of activism when it comes to mediums. With Lucie show and embroidery happening here, what type of mediums do you utilize in your artwork, and how can particular mediums have a power, like public art, for example? That conversation is a medium, that's powerful. What types of mediums do you utilize in your artwork and why?
You know, over the last maybe 10 or 15 years, I've been collecting plastic, still discarded plastic containers, you know, bottles, jugs, whatever, right? And I'm making art. But I don't only do it because I need material. I also do it because I want to participate in this whole movement to try to save the earth, you know. So rather than these plastic containers ending up in a field, you know, or floating on the ocean, they end up hopefully in a gallery, you know, where somebody can enjoy them. So sometimes your medium, you know, can mean a lot, you know. That it meant a lot to me to be able to do that, to be able to take plastics and make them into different things, you know.
Yeah. Also, personally, I recently started experimenting more or less with the Ghana Must Go bags because of the narrative that I'm trying to push. I would normally do image transfers, just Xerox image transfers onto the canvas of certain things. Like you saw in that painting. But I had this idea for the one with the flag in the background, the guy with the folded arm. Oh, that one,
yeah.
yeah. So I was in this painting. I was basically referencing different variations of the U.S. flag. As you can see, like the freedom of speech by what's her first name? Mary. I forgot. And I'll come back to that. Yeah, so I was trying to reference these different variations where the U.S. flag has been used as a sign of protest. But in my head, I am not protesting anything. I was going off of this idea that America was built on the backs of immigrants, and for us, having that kind of for a lot of immigrants, having that kind of association is a thing of pride, you know. So I try to portray that like in this like very African looking man standing proudly in front of the US flag, but instead of the flags, I use strips of the Ghana Must Go to indicate like his immigration status. Oh, you're proudly standing in front of the US flag, but technically not. So I kind of like call this like the immigrant flag because you see like different variations that I used to protest or push certain ideas. So that is one way I'm trying to explore with mediums. And I realized that just doing an image transfer of like maybe like stripes of red from the bag would not cut it. The materiality I feel adds a lot to the narrative. So I kind of play with that, and I have like paintings that I'm currently working on that pushes this idea. And in the future, I also intend to do just flags without individuals, like without people in it, just like a bunch of flags with the same, just see how people respond to that, because not everybody is familiar with this, the history of the Ghana Must Go, even though they know about it, but see just the response to it in general.
This. And I say that, you know, somewhat being facetious, but my life has been busy for some years now, right? And so for me, it's been what's most accessible, and digital media has honestly been the most accessible medium for me in the last few years. So that's looked like photography, that's looked like digital illustration of some sort, that's looked like exploration of like Black folk, Black designers, and modernism, right? Like, and what has our contribution been to like graphic design and trying to pull some of that aesthetic into the work that I do for even clients. You know what I mean? So how can I express? So, you know, for me, it has been, digital media has been the most accessible for me just from a capacity standpoint in the last few years. And that has been, and sometimes that's my phone, sometimes that's my expensive camera when I can go out and get away with shooting, and you know, and a lot of that has just been documenting family, particularly men in my family, or close friends. So that's what has emerged for me. I'm definitely not bound to digital media, but for me, that's been what's been most accessible. You know what I mean? And so because I have to create, or it's going to come out in other ways. Like I have to
choose all. I choose.
Yeah, you know, it's like I'm designing documents that don't need to be designed, right? So I have to find that outlet. And so for me, I guess my own kind of artistic purity have accepted and surrendered that, whatever is accessible to me in that moment, if it's this piece of paper and a pen, or if it's, my phone or my computer, and I can make a collage real quick, video, particularly from my phone. So I've been really like documenting Black folk. So Eris is opening at Wild Goose, for instance. They were skating in a gallery, and I was like, man, like, this is art. Like Black folk skating in a gallery is like, talk about master narrative, like where, right? And now, like, so I want to put music to that. Like, I want to, like, my mind went somewhere, and I'm still working on that. But like, it's happening right here. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I think, in the spirit of Lucie, like, what is available to me? What do I have skill in and capacity in? And if I can create through that, then that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, and I have to unlearn a lot of what I've been taught is art and fine art and what is considered art, and that it has to be a painting. It has to be. I facilitated making, right, in a lot of ways and participated. I mean, the box part, all of those things. I do a paint by numbers kind of mural event. But for me personally, it's been that. So.
Yeah, the skating at Eris event, I'm still.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. But thinking about even that, right? Particularly for Black artists, the tools that we use or the mediums we use have always had utility and accessibility. So even skating in Black culture is a form of like therapy, right, in existence. So I think understanding the utility, the accessibility of mediums is important, particularly in this work as well. I think to that point, like digital technology, et cetera, I think AI is going to be something you really have to tap into. That's a conversation whether it's art, whether it's not art, but it's here. But kind of going back into this conversation, one thing about medium is this materiality. I think you mentioned that, right? And with materiality, you also have positionality. And with positionality, you have intersectionality, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand. And on this panel, as artists, as educators, as researchers, et cetera, right, we all have these intersectional identities. And it's oftentimes a challenge to make art. That's oftentimes a challenge to be able to educate or to research. So how do you navigate that intersectionality in your work?
One of the things that I've done with the plastics that I use is I create images that kind of raise questions about gender identity. I will do pieces that, I don't know how to describe it. It's, kind of the intersection of genders, in some of my work. It has a lot to do with my thinking about, heterosexual, hegemony, how do I, I don't know how to talk about it. I do it better than I can talk about it. But I kind of pull together, African cultural expressions and questions about gender identity. So I have created Nkondi sculptures that have both female and male parts. And I do it a lot in my mixed media and Conde pieces. But that's one way in which I kind of intersect African cultural expression, art, and gender identity.
I'm black, I'm male, heterosexual, you know, all of the things cis. I think for me, like intimacy between black men has probably prevailed. Like, so I started a series of just trying to capture photos of family members and smiling. So I got a lot of family in Chicago and friends here, and just realizing, like, you know, even in my immediate family, lacking the ability to have intimacy. So, or what does that look like, you know, between us, not romantic, but just closeness and proximity, joy. You know, if you ask a black man to smile, in a lot of cases they struggle, you know what I mean? Like, so I remember starting the series with my cousins and, like, you know, smile, asking them to smile, and they'd be like, I don't smile. You know what I mean? And I'll make a joke with them, or there's a line that I kind of use as like the prompt, right? It's from a Scarface Tupac song, and it's not actually in the lyrics, it's in the background where Tupac says, smile, nigga, you black. and so that always stuck out to me, and whenever I hear the song, I listen for that moment. And so, and then, you know, that, you know, definitely questions my own struggles with intimacy and things like that. And so I think for me, and then one of the things that when I actually showed those pieces, I think last year, was it last year? Yes. Like, we cropped them very close. So we showed them at the Box Park Gallery, and then we showed them actually kind of impromptu at Uppercut Coffee Shop, which was, you know, it's a small shop, and they're like 3 feet by 3 feet and cropped really closely. And I got so many messages from, like, folk who I didn't necessarily know, but saw my name and was like, you know, I just walked in and started smiling. And then it just made me realize, like, people have not been in close proximity to black men, particularly black men in moments of joy. And so it was, like, very shocking for people to kind of see and be that, like, close, like you almost feel like you're, like, in their face and they're smiling at you. So for me, that's kind of where it's showing up. And I know that's not necessarily an intersectional question, but it definitely is where my intersectionality kind of shows up. And sort of struggling with what that has looked like, how I may have not shown up for family members and, you know, siblings and parents and community members in certain kinds of ways because of how I've been socialized. So, yeah.
So I personally may not have a lot to say about that, but I just want to talk about an experience that so my art's about, like, immigrant communities, immigrant culture, and just what it's like within such communities. And a lot of the times you realize that most of the people I paint are black people, specifically black Africans, but because these are the people that I'm constantly talking about. But I had a conversation with somebody, and essentially they were just trying to draw my attention to, they were alluding to the fact that it's a closed community. If it's just a community of you, your people, and that's it. And I did this painting. Okay, perfect. I did this painting to kind of push back that kind of idea that it's not a closed community. It's very welcoming and open to different cultures as well. And it is the case, because I mean this was This is Ramadan in Athens, a school college town, and normally when it's time to break our fast, we'd have friends from our different departments coming to join us to eat. So I just wanted to push back against that idea that it's a close community, which is not the case. It can be, because we're living in an environment with different kinds of people from different cultural backgrounds. There's constant engagement with these other people. The fact that I'm talking a lot about like my people doesn't necessarily mean it's just a close community. So this painting was kind of like to push back against that idea.
One of the things that Dr. Sarah pointed out about Lucie's work that I think struck me was that she intentionally put women and female point of view in these stories, which is not often, which again was convicting, right? Like, because when we often think about Lumumba, even intentionally putting the story, the mythos around his wife and daughter and crossing a river, I think was just very striking. And so, yeah, there's just a lot there, you know, when we talk about intersectionality, particularly with art and how that starts to show up. Yeah.
In her work, she like renders the women visible in these stories and in these histories, but in the claims that she makes on the identities that she has as a historian, as an artist, as an educator, she claims fairly male gendered roles in her society as well. So she does more than just put the women central in her work. She claims roles that are not easily occupied by women in current day Congolese society, especially in sort of conflict-ridden areas. And so that's quite bold of her to make that move in that sense. I think there's, in making an exhibition like that, for me, I also have to be very careful, right? Because I am a white Belgian woman that is here to sort of talk about her work, and there's a very fine line between creating a platform and amplifying and speaking for someone, and I don't think that that's some of that you learn by making mistakes and by realizing, okay, and it's a very difficult role, but so just to say like that's not. If you work as a curator in that context, that you're not a neutral. You're not a neutral force, and so it's a very fine line to walk to try and, in a case like this, is it better not to do it? I don't believe that. I think it's better to do it, but that's my personal opinion. But then, how do you do it right? How do do I do it right without speaking for her? How do I let her voice sort of dominate in this and global inequalities? The global situation makes it such that I cannot bring her voice to this particular space. Even if I wanted to, it's practically impossible actually, because of a variety of reasons. But so yeah. That question of intersectionality matters when you curate work as well.
The medium, it goes back, like, I don't know any male, I'm limited in my knowledge in that regard, but like when I think about crochet or quilters or this specific medium, there is, I can't name one male off the top of my head right away, right? Like, the images, the people who come to mind are very much women, you know what I mean? So I think even that, the choice of medium starts to raise the question around intersectionality and how that shows up in gender roles and things like that too, so.
Yeah, but it's also interesting because she's currently training people, including men.
I saw that, yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
textile making broadly sort of conceived in a variety of, and Congo has many hundreds of different cultures, right? But it's not necessarily gendered female in customary settings. There are communities where men, it might be that men produce a certain kind of weaving or fabric, and that women produce a different kind. That is, for example, the case with the Kuba with a K community in the central Kasai, who has very famous textile production, textile art. So it is not that gendering female of textile arts is a colonial product.
Yeah.
And so she has a little bit of space there to push back against that, because people might have had grandfathers who worked in, produced textiles, for example.
Yeah. And that's interesting and important, because I was having this conversation, I think, earlier. We were talking about works internationally, right, that they come into the United States, right? And art is not understood, created in a vacuum, right? There's social, political context. So what happens when the conversation really happens and those come here? And now we're bringing our perspective, right? I say this as someone from the United States, to that work, right? And then how can those two conversations raise awareness, right? Like, okay, what do I think? And is this influenced by my indoctrination in this country, or my understanding, my education? And then intersectionality, I think we were saying, how can we do this? And how could you do this responsibly, sensitively, right? And I think you just did it, right? I think that reflexivity is at the crux of those conversations, right? Because I think with intersectionality, one thing that intersects all identities, fortunately or unfortunately, right, is race. You talk about gender, class, status, whatever it is, race intersects that, right? Whether it was in the feminist movement, whether it was in civil rights, whether it's in the class and labor, right? It was always intersected by race. So I think to have this reflexivity or this understanding or acknowledgement of our position within this continuum, within these identities, right? Not to try to be the author of those conversations, but to present them and say, I can understand and speak to a part of this, but I also acknowledge that some of this is outside of it. And just having that discussion is the path.
And learning from it.
Yeah, definitely, I appreciate that comment. So thank you all for being here. And, yeah, just want to thank you.